All right.
Hello and welcome to Beaverdale Books. Thanks so much for coming to today's book talk. Before we begin, we are looking forward to Thomas and Bradley on Wednesday, June 10th at 6:30 p.m. for an insightful talk about his book, Marching Without Applause, The Officers Who Defied a Nation's Doubt. Then on Monday, June 15th at 7 p.m., Tiara Jones will be at Central Library as an avid author and will talk about her New York Times bestseller, Kin. You can find all the details on our website or pick up an event list from our front counter or sign up for our twice-monthly newsletter. Now on to today's book, Roxie in Color. It's a new children's novel poignantly centering sighted middle schooler coming of age in a blind family. Diane Debrovner is the former deputy editor of Parents Magazine and the author of the article, What Blind Parents Want You to See, which provided the spark for this novel. She now helps nonprofits share their stories to raise the funding they need. Diane lives in New York City with her family and a dog who loves watermelon. And Stacy Cervenka is the director of the Iowa Department of the Blind and previously led the Blind Parents Group for the National Federation of the Blind. She divides her time between Des Moines and Lincoln, Nebraska, where she lives with her husband and 2 children. Just like Roxie's family, Stacy and her husband Greg are blind, while their children, Leo and Josephine, are sighted. Please join me in a warm welcome for Diane and Stacy. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having us. And I think some people just came in. If you like, there are some seats toward the front. And if not, you can always stand in the back. But I'm Stacy Cervenka, and this is my co-author, Diane Debrovner. Diane and I met in 2018 when Diane was the deputy editor of Parents Magazine. And she encountered a blind parent and realized that she, and Diane will talk a little bit about this, she'd done articles on a lot of different parents and different parenting styles and a lot of different child development issues, but she hadn't encountered a parent who was blind before. So she decided to do a story on parents who are blind. So she contacted me at that time. I was the chairperson of the Blind Parents Group of the National Federation of the Blind, and she interviewed me, my husband, Greg, who is also blind, and about a dozen other blind parents. And then, Diane, do you want to take it from there as far as the genesis for the book?
Sure. I heard lots of interesting stories. Everyone had a unique story to tell, but I heard a lot of similar themes in what parents told me about how other families had misperceptions about their families, and they had some clarifications that they wanted to share. And so the story was really a list of different truths that they wanted to share. And as I was working on the story, I started thinking about what it would be like from a child's perspective. I was already writing middle grade fiction, so I was thinking about the perspective of a 12-year-old who's often the age of a middle grade novel. And a lot of the scenarios that I heard in our conversations felt like they could be part of a novel. So the article came out and we won some awards, which was very nice. We got a nice reception from the blind community. And I decided to start writing this book from the perspective of Roxie, who is sighted, like I am. She's one of the 2 narrators. And the other narrator is Nash, who is Roxie's mother's guide dog. So several of the chapters are told from the perspective of the dog. And I started writing it, and then I realized that I really couldn't do it myself and tell the story in the way that it deserved to be told. And fortunately, Stacy and I had stayed in touch, and I called Stacy, and I asked her if she wanted to work on this project with me, and she said yes, and we were off to the races.
So Diane and I wrote the novel primarily through Google Docs, and we would talk about what a chapter needed to do and then kind of assign it to one of us. So for example, we might say, okay, in this chapter, Roxie is getting home from the party at the skating rink. She needs to, we'll learn a little bit more about Dad's rock climbing hobby, and then we'll have her have a conversation with Charlie about the possibility of losing her sight. And then, I would go ahead and write that chapter, and then Diane would look at it and make sure it aligned with sort of the voice of her chapters and the information and the things that we know about the character in her chapters. And then she would do the same. She would write a chapter or parts of the book, and then I would read it and say, oh, hey, but in chapter 2 we said this and that, remember that won't align, or, we would just kind of make sure that each other's work was accurate and that we were speaking with the same voice throughout the book. So it was a lot of fun because it allowed for a lot of creativity. I would always know like what my chapter needed to do, like what work the chapter needed to do and where it needed to get us in the book. But I enjoyed, getting to write the dialogue and, then we'd kind of surprise each other sort of with what we came up with. And so I think it actually went pretty well as far as the novel kind of, I think it sounds like it was written by the same person. So I think we did a pretty good job of keeping the same voice. And one of the things that's kind of interesting that Nash does, I think Nash does 2 really important things. Nash does, I was a little bit, I'm not a guide dog user myself, so I can't really write from the experiences of someone who uses a dog. And I know that most blind people don't use guide dogs. And we didn't want the guide dog to be a tool for inspiration porn. Like, oh, isn't that dog wonderful? What would its handler do without it? But the nice thing about Nash is that it allows us to be in some of the rooms that Roxie is not in. So, for example, when Mom meets meets one of Roxie's friends at a store, Nash is with Mom. So we're able to be in some places that Roxie isn't through Nash. Another thing, so the book kind of has sort of 2 main sort of plot lines. The first one is Roxie moves to a new town and starts 7th grade at a new school. She's been bullied at her previous school, partially because of her sort of sensitive artistic nature, but also because her family is different. And so Roxie decides when she comes to her new school that she wants to try to blend in. So she doesn't want the other kids to know that her parents are blind until they really get to know her first, so that she's not just the girl with blind parents. And so throughout the book, we learn a lot about some of the issues that blind people face. Like we learn about guide dog discrimination in Uber and at restaurants. We learn about website inaccessibility. Here, I'll let everybody take a seat. Excited to have folks here. So we learn about some of the issues such as website inaccessibility, guide dog denial, and Uber and Lyft. We learn about just some of sort of the misperceptions that people have about people who are blind and low vision. Eventually, Roxie's 2 worlds come together, and her friends do learn that Mom and Dad are blind. And unfortunately, she and her friends make a really unwise decision that leads to her family being reported to Child Protective Services. Okay, it sounds like I'm at the ocean, so that's fun. So eventually, Roxie and her friends make an unwise decision that leads to Mom and Dad being investigated by Child Protective Services. And now Roxie goes from kind of wanting to keep Mom and Dad a bit of a secret to now having to speak up for what's right and having to speak out against an unfair system and having to basically stand up for the people that she loves. And I think that's an incredibly important message for kids nowadays, to tell the truth and to speak up for those that they love and for those that they see maybe being hurt by a system that is treating them unfairly.
Yeah. People in children's books often talk about books being both windows and mirrors for readers, that they can be windows for readers to learn about people who are different from them, and just to sort of be actually in somebody else's head for the, it's a rare situation to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And then they can be mirrors for people to see their own lives reflected in some way in a book. And even for a 12-year-old, just to see that somebody else feels as self-conscious or nervous as they are, wants to make friends in the same way as they do, it can make you feel less alone to read about a character who has some of the same experiences that you do. One of the things that helped us write this book quickly is that I'm a morning person and I get up really early in the morning to write, and Stacy tends to be a night person. So she would work on a chapter really late at night, and then I would wake up early in the morning and it would be ready for me to work on. And so we were able to bounce things back and forth that way.
And for me, kind of one of the most the book has been reviewed by Kirkus Reviews and School Library Journal and a bunch of other places, but to me, when I have a blind friend read it, and they say, I could tell this was written by a blind person, or, I've never seen the blind community reflected in quite this way, that means more to me than pretty much anything else. So I like that. I think there are parts of the book that a blind person will know that a blind person wrote this. So that means something to me.
Yeah. And I think the perception that we've got has been that it feels like it's a book about feeling different and wanting to fit in without having to hide who you are. And there are a lot of kids who can fit into that category. Probably every kid has felt different in some way. So we're hoping that in addition to welcoming sighted readers into a world that they may not know that much about, that it will help anyone who reads it feel that they can relate to what her story is about.
And I think especially kids who come from families that might be different from those around them, whether maybe your family speaks a different language at home, or maybe you're from a single parent family, or you're being raised by your grandparents, or there's something different about your family. Maybe you come home and mom and dad cook food that smells differently than the food that your friends' families cook. I think there are a lot of families and a lot of kids that will relate to just the feeling that my family's a little bit different, and how do I introduce that to my friends. And when I go to schools and I ask them, have you ever felt like your family's a little bit different, or wondered what your friends would think of your family, almost all the kids raise their hands and they say things like, yeah, because we have so many pets and I always wonder what my friends are going to think about, like all the birds flying around our house, or or yeah, because my sister is so annoying and I always wonder if they're going to think all my siblings are annoying. So I think it's something that a lot of kids can relate to.
Should I read a little bit from chapter 1? Maybe we'll take a little break and I'll read and show you how the book starts, and then we can talk some more. I do want to say that I'm particularly happy to be here, even though I am from New York. My grandmother grew up in Des Moines, and she had 6 brothers and sisters, and she was born in 1909, and she lived here. She lived near the Old Mercy Hospital, and I don't think it's there anymore. And then Parents Magazine was published by Meredith, which is another long-time Des Moines company, so it's nice to be back here. So I'm going to read to you from chapter 1. The best part about painting on your wall is that as soon as it dries, you can paint right over it. Put birds in a tree, pepperoni on pizza, or a leash on your dog. You can change anything like it never even happened. If only the same were true about school. Roxie can't paint over all the times when she sat alone at recess, or didn't have a partner in science, or when someone laughed as she passed by because they still remembered the cupcake disaster. But this year is going to be different. Roxie checks the time. She's been up since 6, trying to decide if it's better to say, nice to meet you, or hey, nice to meet you, or just, hey. Her parents had finally decided to move, not just to a house around the corner, but to a whole new town in a new school district. It was her chance to start over, to make friends who'd say, come sit with us, share our inside jokes, join the group chat. She could be a brand new blend of colors, not just some stick figure drawn with a black Sharpie by people who don't really know her. Roxie rearranges the nail polish bottles on her dresser and then puts them back in rainbow order. She stands next to Nash and looks in the mirror to reassess her outfit, black leggings and a gray and white striped shirt. What do you think? Low-key but not trying too hard? Nash wags his tail, leaving a trail of yellow hair on her knee. Gee, thanks a lot, she says, rubbing his head and grabbing the lint roller. Well, tell Mom you need a good brushing tonight. Roxie looks at the picture she painted next to her closet, the one with a butterfly on Nash's head. Every time she picks a patch of wall, the image in her mind slides down her arm, through the paintbrush, and becomes real. But mixing white, brown, yellow, and black to make the perfect yellow lab color is so much easier than finding the right words to strike up a conversation like it's no big deal. She kneels, holds Nash's face, and gazes into his gentle brown eyes. I know, I'm procrastinating. If I don't leave soon, I'll be late. Since Theo is starting kindergarten, Mom will be busy taking him to school. Roxie can finally walk to school by herself. Nash follows her into the kitchen, smelling breakfast. Mom made her favorite banana pancakes, but Roxie can't finish the second one because it feels like there's microwave popcorn in her stomach. It's going to be a good day, Mom says, kissing the top of her head. I know you're probably a little nervous. Starting a new school can feel scary for everyone. Mom, I'm not one of your clients. Sorry, I'll stop. You've got this. Can I have that pancake if you're not eating it? Theo says, reaching over with his fork. Sure, says Roxie. Dad walks into the kitchen, putting on his watch. Rox, the Braille label fell off this shirt in the wash. Is this my white or black polo? Black, says Roxie as she takes her plate to the sink. She puts it in the dishwasher and fills up her water bottle. Hey, Dad, says Theo from the kitchen table. I have a funny joke. Okay, buddy, what is it? Why did the banana go to the doctor? Roxie and her parents wait, wondering if this will be one of those jokes that Theo made up himself and only makes sense to him. Why? Asked Dad. Because it wasn't peeling well. Theo dissolves into giggles. Get it? Oh, that's funny, says Dad. Roxie rolls her eyes as she puts her water bottle in the outside pocket of her backpack, and then she gives Mom and Dad quick hugs. Prepare for the worst, but hope for the best, she tells herself. School rules, Theo says. She gives them a high five before shutting the door behind her. Sometimes she wishes she could be as naive as him again. She's seen plenty of shows about middle school and knows that kids in 7th grade can be mean. When you're walking down the hall, they can point and whisper and make you feel like you've got a giant pimple on your nose. Walking to school with Mom and Nash used to make her feel safe. Whenever Roxie's stomach felt twisty, Mom would tell her to breathe in for 4 and out for 7, and it always helped. Part of Roxie wished that Nash could stay with her all day, like he was her guide dog. So that's how the story starts, and school is a little bit of what she expects and a lot of what she doesn't expect, and we tried to make things difficult for her. One of the tough things about writing a novel is that you create these characters and you care about them and you want things to work out for them, but you also have to make things challenging because else the story is boring. You want to tell a little bit about that? That's something I learned when I was writing the restaurant chapter. As a blind person, if I go out to eat and I tell you about it, I'm going to say, last night I went out to eat. I'm not going to, it all just feels very normal to me. But really kind of capturing some of those interactions that we might have at a restaurant. So it's not really giving a whole lot away, but when Roxie and her family and another family with blind parents go to a restaurant, first of all, they don't want to let in Mom's guide dog. And then they don't have a Braille menu. And then the little brother knocks over a pitcher of water, and the waiter thinks Mom and Dad did it, and is like, why aren't you helping your parents? And while these things, I think all of us can relate. All of us have been with someone who's used a guide dog who, has had difficulty entering an establishment or getting in somewhere, or been to a restaurant where they didn't have Braille menus, or just all those types of things. But I thought, man, all of this happening at the same restaurant visit, oh my goodness. But then I kind of had to realize, well, stuff has to happen. It can't just be Roxie goes to a restaurant, the food was good. Next chapter. So really kind of capturing in such a limited space some of the interactions that we as blind people have. And my husband reminds me, I forgot to leave the waiter talking to the sighted person at the table. I forgot that one. But we kind of have that at the beginning, where the woman, the hostess, kind of looks around for another adult and sees only Mom and all the blind adults, and and so, so it, like Diane said, you're like, oh my gosh, how much stuff has to happen, but you realize it's a book. Stuff has to happen. So that was definitely something I learned. In the book, it was also really important. So Mom and Dad, Mom is a psychologist who's written a book about how to have a stronger marriage, and Dad is a software engineer. And then they have friends, the Novaks, and he is a professor at a university, and she works in the recreation field. And I was kind of able to use some of the challenges that my husband faced finding a job in the recreation field for that character's backstory.
And so I really wanted to show that mom and dad were not the only blind parents in the world, that it wasn't that Roxie's parents are so different and they're so different from everyone else's in the entire world. I wanted to make sure that we depicted another family that had blind kids, or that had blind parents. And, there's a blind YouTuber in the story. And so we wanted to make sure that there were other blind characters besides just Roxie's parents so that readers could see sort of a variety. And I often think I would love to write a book about either a kid who's blind and doesn't know any other blind kids, or a kid who's losing their sight who goes away to a summer program where we meet lots of different blind summer campers and blind counselors, and we see the many different journeys that blind people have, and the different ways that we might feel about our blindness, or the different experiences that we might have with our family or our school, or how we think about it. So I'd love to write that type of story where a person who's either new to blindness or hasn't been around the blind community very much goes to some sort of summer program and meets lots of different blind children and adults. So that's something I'd really love to see done and would love to do.
Another one of the aspects of the story is that Roxie's mom has retinitis pigmentosa, and her parents have given her the opportunity to decide whether she wants to take the genetic test to find out whether she has the gene and she could inherit the condition herself. And so that's one of the things that she's wrestling with at the beginning of the book, and she's trying to decide if it's possible that she's going to lose her vision. Is it better to know or to not know? And Lena, who is this very cool 20-something woman who makes YouTube videos, also had retinitis pigmentosa, and so that is a way for her to see what her life might be like and realize that there's someone really cool that she can look up to. And we had fun writing those chapters.
We did. Oh,
Does anyone have any questions?
we'll have to open it up to questions.
Well, I was going to ask if there's any humor in the book, but
None.
you gave an example.
We
of
can
that
all
joke.
thank, you know who we can thank for Theo's joke? Leo.
Yeah.
That is a direct Leo joke. I have the little video clip. It exists.
Well, I have to say that the dog chapters do have
some humor.
some levity to that. Not that the book is very serious, but it was nice to imagine what it would be like to be a dog.
So I guess I'll ask both of you, as you create characters and you live with them, what are the pleasures that you get out of that, and also what are the emotional risks that you feel like you take when you write a novel?
Thank you, philosophical professor. Can you tell us in layman's terms what that meant? No, I'm just kidding. I think it's hard because, in a way, you want a character to be like you and your family, but you also have to realize that, Roxie is not Leo and Josephine. Roxie is Roxie, and Roxie's had her own set of circumstances. And for me, sometimes, I'm going to be honest with you guys, you're going to find Roxie so frustrating and annoying. Like, sometimes she's a tough character because she's a middle school girl. She's a middle school 12-year-old. And middle schoolers can be a little overdramatic and don't always make great decisions. And there are times when it's like, oh my gosh, why does Roxie have to do this? But it's like, well, it has to be realistic. We're not creating this saintly character who just says all the right things and does all the right things and acts exactly like we would want her to act. She's a, middle school student. So that was, that was tough. I think I really enjoyed creating the Novak family because I felt like they were a little bit more like our family. Greg and I have talked to our kids extensively about blindness and about like how when people have interactions with us that are uncomfortable or something, we'll talk about it. Or we'll say, why do you think that guy talked to you instead of mom and dad? And so what could you do next time? Or what could we do next time? And it's kind of funny because Roxie's a psychologist, but it's always like the cobbler's children go barefoot, where, Roxie's mom realizes that, maybe they haven't talked about this enough, and they haven't talked about how the discrimination mom and dad face, how it impacts Roxie, and how the misperceptions that mom and dad face, like how that impacts Roxie as well. And so, it was just, I think I really enjoyed most creating characters that felt like our family, but I also had to remember that I'm not writing a book that's based on my own kids.
Middle school is a tough time for anyone, and even though it's been many years since I was in middle school, a lot of those memories are still very fresh in my mind. And I think one of the good parts and the challenging parts about writing a novel is to try to have your character be really honest about how they feel about themselves and the people in their world, and to, even if they're not saying these things out loud, we have access to what the character is thinking. And kids at that age often have just sort of messy feelings as they're trying to figure out their place in the world, and they don't always think the most positive thoughts because they're trying to make sense of different things. And so we wanted it to seem authentic and honest. And sometimes you worry that you might insult someone, right? You don't want a character to say something bad about parents, because if you're a parent and you imagine that you're going to read it, you don't want to do anything that could make anybody feel bad. And so it's a fine balance to walk, I think, between being authentic and making sure that we're not crossing any boundaries.
You know, I think about when I was a kid, one of the things that used to embarrass me so much was my gym teacher always had a song that he would sing when he called you out to, like, you know, demonstrate a skill or something. And whenever he would call me out, he would sing this Stevie Wonder song, and he would go, la, 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 la. So anyway, I was mortified. I hated it. Like, inside, I was bawling. Now, if that's a song, I love that song. And if that's the song that you want to be my intro song, that's awesome. Like, I love Stevie Wonder, and I appreciate all the amazing work that he's done for our community. And Stevie Wonder has done, I mean, he's at CSUN, like, every year, and he's done a ton of amazing work for the blind community. But when I was a kid, I was always getting compared to Stevie Wonder. And as a little child who was, 10, and he was, more my parents' generation, I didn't appreciate it in the way that I would today. Today, Stevie Wonder is a big part of the reason we have Martin Luther King Day. And because of his song Happy Birthday, and the if you know that song that he does, the Happy Birthday song, if you haven't heard it, you should listen to it. It's amazing. And I've watched documentaries on, like, the political work that song did. So now, if you want to say, compare me to Stevie Wonder in any way, like, I will thank you. But as a kid, it wasn't my favorite. Any other questions?
I guess I'll just ask, this isn't really a question, I just want to say that listening to you, Diane, read the chapter, as someone who also hasn't been in middle school for over 30 years, it took me back there, and that was both, positive and negative, right? Thinking about being a kid in middle school, it's one period of my life that I would just as soon forget, but it's also important to go back there and see how you've grown, how you've changed, and how you're still the same in many ways. We still fear what other people think and say about us, even though we're 50.
Thank you.
Very true.
It's a really challenging and fun time of life to write about, because there's so much going on in your head. You're making so many decisions and trying to find your place, and people can have such a strong impact on you in a positive and a negative way. So it gave us a lot of opportunities for stories to tell.
Any other questions? Happy to answer.
If not,
Yes,
thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for being here, and thank you, Diane and Stacy.